Sinners and saints, dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Allen After Dark.
How y'all doing tonight? You feeling well? You feeling sexy? You horny? I hope you are if you want to be. I'm a little bit horny myself, I have to admit, and I am looking forward to happy hour in just a couple of hours, actually. And I hope you're going to enjoy an adult beverage, a cocktail, if you will. I've been thinking a lot about my childhood today, feeling sentimental, I suppose. I guess sometimes when I'm looking back on my life, I truly think that it is a miracle that I'm here now, that I'm still alive and in good, relatively good health, and am successful and have friends. But do you ever think about how all the paths that led you to where you are right now, that one different decision that you made sometime in the past would have put you somewhere else? That level of coincidence or decision making or circumstance? I think about it a lot as I've gotten older, that what if I had not made a certain decision? And I want to go back to something that happened that I can look at that really changed my whole direction in my life. So let's take a trip back in time to a chance opportunity that totally changed my world. You long-term listeners know that I had fallen in love with someone and left everything behind to be with him. And when that didn't work out, I had to come back and I wound up living with my parents. I had nothing at that point, and I was dealing with the I told you so's and everything else that they were unleashing on me. Well, I had managed to find a temporary position with a temp service that was actually not too far from my parents' house, which was a shock. Living out in the country, there were very few opportunities nearby. You usually have to drive upwards of 30 to 45 minutes for a job. So I had landed this position, and it was a temporary position. Wasn't paying very much, but at least it was giving me some money in my pocket to start saving in preparation for getting an apartment and moving out on my own. I had, to be honest, I despised my hometown. I despised that whole area. I despised most people that live there, mainly because of their anti-gay attitudes. If they're going to hate me, I'm going to hate them right back. I just hated all that hypocrisy and all the bullshit that they spewed there, but I needed to survive. I am working at this position for a while, and it's a pain in the ass. I don't really like it, but I'm going to stick with it because I need the money. During that time of working there, I was still actively looking for a permanent position. So I was going places, filling out applications, wherever I needed to go to try to get a permanent job that actually paid relatively well. And was very disappointed that no job opportunities were coming through. But at least I had this temporary position that probably was going to last at least a couple of years, if not longer. I was developing friendships again, not at work, but I was starting to, once again, explore the gay community, even though while living at home with my parents, I still felt the need to lie and make up excuses about where I was going, rather than telling the truth that I was going to one of the bigger cities, to the club, to have a good time, to get laid, or whatever. Well, one day, I come home from work, and my mom had dinner ready, and we were sitting there eating dinner. And in the conversation, she just said, "Oh, well, you got this call about a job, but I told them that you already had one, so to never mind." And I'm like, "What? What did you do?" And she says, "Well, you have a job. You don't need one." I'm like, "Mom, I have a temporary job. I need a full-time permanent job." And she goes, "Well, I wrote the number down, so if you want to call them, you can do that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I do. I want to call them." So I did. And there was a company in a city about 30 minutes away. And they said to call this certain person and he would talk to me and he would decide if he wanted to interview. Well, I talked with him and let's call him Mark. And we kind of hit it off on the phone and he asked me to come in for an interview. And I did. I made up an excuse that I was going to the dentist and I went to interview with Mark in this town about 35, 40 minutes away, 30 minutes, something like that. And we hit it off. And a couple of days later, he called me and said he wanted to offer me the job. And I took that job. And that job put me in a position to where I could rent an apartment nearby this new job and start reliving my life and not the life that my parents were trying to control. That decision to take that position led me to a separate opportunity that would have never happened had I not taken that position, to where I found a company that allowed me to take trips around the world to places that I would have never gotten to go without the company's help. Now, granted, they were business trips, but I was afforded the opportunity to see places that I would have never gotten to see. And it led to where I am at this point in my life today. But had my mother not mentioned that she had received that call and she had taken the number, she could have totally redirected my life in a way that I'm almost afraid to think about. It's a terrifying thought when I think about it now. What could have happened had that not occurred? Do you ever think about things like that? Does it even matter? I have a good friend who says wonderful things. He's very supportive in our conversations, and he would say things like, no, you make your own future. You make your own life. You would have come out ahead no matter what. And I'm grateful for those kind words. But I do have to wonder, what would have happened had that one little thing not occurred in my life? When I think about that, I think about a discussion on my friend Jacob's podcast. He's one of the hosts of Watch Your Spaghetti Policy podcast. And they were talking about time travel and dying. And could you go back and change things to prevent your death from happening? It almost feels like the same thing with what I'm talking about here. Had that one moment not occurred, my life would be different. If you could go back in time and accidentally change something, what would you have messed up in your life? I don't know. Should we be thinking about things like that? Is it worth thinking about? It is for me, because I want to think about such things. I think it helps me become more grateful, more thankful for what I've accomplished. Do I consider that luck? Maybe. Should I consider it luck? Who knows? Let me add to the newcomers who haven't listened to previous episodes that this new position led me to my first affair with a boss, with one of the hottest men that I ever hooked up with, who really was straight, but loved getting a blowjob from me. And I was in love with him. I was. So much so that the previous boss, who actually had hired me at that company, had said, "You love him, you never love me." And I'm like, where are you coming at with that shit? But technically, I did love him as a friend. But no, I was not only in love with the new boss, I was also in lust. I still get a boner just thinking about him and our sexual encounters. There were only two, but those two pretty much will last a lifetime, at least in my memory. So there was an added bonus to that decision that I made. And I don't know, the way I'm talking, I'm sounding more and more like I'm believing that it was a spot of luck, that karma played a hand in it, that something else, I don't know. I do believe that you work with what you have and do the best you can. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I guess you can say that I am lucky, I suppose, even though that sounds superstitious. But is there anything really wrong with the novelty of superstition and luck? I miss those days. There were some terrible days with that company, but they were some of the best days of my life. And if you go back and listen to some of my earliest episodes, You can relive some of that memory with me. That boss and the golf course incident. Whew, wow, that was fucking hot. Some would say, including myself, that my worst characteristic is that I don't like change. I like stability. I like continuity. I like repetition. And sometimes that personality trait has almost cost me those opportunities. When I talk about how that incident with my mother, by happenstance telling me about this potential job that led to the job that took me around the world, I just realized that there is a missing section in that story. The company I was working for that I just mentioned, well, it went down harder than the Titanic when it was over. But because of, I guess, my status with the bosses there, they transferred me to the bigger city to work in a division of the company that wasn't going belly up. It was sold off to a different company, and I landed a position there, which afforded me the opportunity then to move to that city. But at the time, I had a lower position there, but I eventually became the manager of that location. And it was horrible. It was the worst position I've ever had in my life. The people, the new owners, were just terrible. They were all assholes. They were mean. They were vulgar. They were bitches. And they were trying to oust me anyway. They were working to push me out. And they brought this guy in who basically I almost got in a fist fight with. Like I said, I have trouble with change, even though change might be needed. And I was miserable at this company, but at least it was a steady job. It was relatively good money. And I felt like at least I had money coming in, even though I was miserable. When they brought this other person in, I knew that I needed to make a change. And I sent out resumes to several companies, and I got this call asking me to come in for an interview. Well, I didn't know this company was a worldwide conglomerate that was one of the most successful in the world. But I decided to go and interview, and it was with two women who were the same age as me. They liked me, and they asked me to come back and interview with the boss, their boss. Already I was hedging. I was like, this is a different town. I'm in the city now, and I'd have to drive every day to this different town. And I wasn't so sure. I didn't know still that this company was as big as people were telling me they were. So the day of the second interview come around, and I chickened out. I did. And I called and said that there had been an accident, which there had been, at my office, and that I would not be able to make it to the interview. Well, for some reason, I finally got the gumption up, and I decided to go on down anyway. And I showed up and I said, hey, I'm here, to the receptionist. I have an interview with the boss, and I am here. I made it. And he said, okay. And I went back and interviewed with him. And he said, well, what happened here? And I told him that I worked for a recycling company, which he knew on my resume. And I said, one of my employees smashed his hand in one of the waste management truck's door, which basically crushed it, and blood was shooting out everywhere. He said, you're able to handle blood and everything? And I said to him, well, when you work in garbage, you pretty much can handle anything. And you know what? He laughed. And when he laughed, I knew that I had that position. It was that position, that job, that led me to being able to travel to Europe, to Africa, to Australia, to China, to places around the world. And I once again think that had I not had the balls to finally get out of that chair in my office at this horrible company and get my ass down there, I would have missed out on the greatest opportunity of my life up to that point. I'm reminded of the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. How interesting. The words of Robert Frost came to mind just like that. Every aspect of all of our lives, there are decisions. And if you really start dwelling on it, what if a different decision had changed your life in an even more positive way? I don't know that I should dwell on that, but what if a decision you didn't make that you should have led you to become a millionaire, a billionaire? But then again, you could have wound up being homeless on the street. Isn't it fascinating, the circumstances of life? With me being the overthinker that you all know already, I guess I could apply this concept to any decision that I've made. It is about choices, isn't it? And as I'm sitting here talking to you guys, I think about the first time I went to a gay bar. And I talked about that in an episode just recently, how nervous I was and how I drove around the block several times and was very hesitant to go in. What if I had decided not to go in and go back home? I think that I would have lost the nerve to ever go back. That would have changed my life in a way that I can't conceive. But honestly, dwelling on the what ifs, what's the saying about never looking back? You can't move forward if you're always looking back. And that's true too. But I think a lot of us are always self-analyzing. We're always thinking about what would have happened. What if this relationship had worked out? What if I had said a different thing to this person? What if the person I was in love with, when I told him that I was in love with him when I was 19 years old, had he said that he was in love with me too? Where would we be now after all these years? Would we still be together? Would we be happy? Would I have been on the same path that I've been on all these years? I wonder. I really do. Thank you for listening to this episode of Alan After Dark. I hope you've had fun, you've been entertained, and maybe I've provoked you into thinking about something you haven't thought about before. Remember, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.